once again to the Only You and Solo 2 podcast. I'm here at the studios. Of course, Dr. Patino in his office. Some interesting news very recently that was announced yesterday, I believe, by President Biden, and that is the vaccine finally being approved by the FDA. What does that actually mean?
You won't believe how many times I've been asked that question since the approval, both from people here locally, friends in Mexico and in South America. Everyone wants to know what it means, right? And what creates a little confusion is that back in December, the Pfizer vaccine, the Pfizer biotech vaccine, was approved, but it was approved into something called the Emergency Use Authorization, the EUA. That means that they actually had the bare bones data, that was long enough to justify its use based on the efficacy and tolerability, meaning side effects that they noticed, right? So, and because of the seriousness of the COVID-19 pandemic, they felt it was appropriate. This is not the first time that an emergency use authorization has been issued. I think it was used for monoclonal antibodies and it has been used for other illnesses where you have a medication that is very promising, but you don't have the full set of data, which is about 18 months of data, right? So in this particular case, we got the emergency use authorization, and it was um, very effective. I mean, we had a significant reduction of uh, infections, and seriousness of illness and deaths as a result of the emergency use authorization. What happened though is that you cannot have an emergency use authorization forever, right? So you have to get to a point in which you do a final authorization when you look at more data. So what has happened is the FDA continue collecting data and Pfizer Biotech continue collecting data since the inception of the emergency use authorization till now. So they look at millions of cases, right, of data, and not only in terms of efficacy, but also in terms of side effects. So when they look at all that data together, they say, well, we have enough data to justify having a full approval. So why is that important? It's important in the context that you're still getting the same vaccine, but there's been a lot of hesitancy. There's been a lot of reluctance from people to use the vaccine, saying, we don't know enough about it. It has been used only on the emergency basis, and that's too risky, right? So for that population, then you have the ability to say, okay, here we go. We have enough data for the FDA, which is the most prominent drug authorization agency in the world in terms of the reluctance to authorize with good data on efficacy and side effects. So that fact opens it up for people to say, well, I feel more comfortable because the vaccine has been looked at in a lot more detail. The second part is that, and this is a controversial part, and it has to do with mandates, right? Let me give you an example. The military was not able to mandate everybody to get the vaccine because it was approved under the emergency use authorization, right? Even though, and you know this because you work with a lot of military people, the military gets all kinds of vaccines. I
Tons,
mean,
tons and tons. Anytime somebody goes overseas, they're shot up with all sorts of stuff.
exactly. But the fact that this was a emergency use authorization kind of prevented the military from issuing this as a mandate. And as soon as the FDA approved this vaccine fully, the military issued a mandate, and everybody in the military must be vaccinated before September 27, having received at least the first vaccine.
Mhm.
So that is going to be opening it up. Okay, even though some people are very against mandates, right? Uh, but it's going to open it up for businesses to say, if you want to work here, you have to be vaccinated. There is also another approach, which is the middle ground, saying we want everybody to be vaccinated, And if you don't want to be vaccinated, you have to have two COVID tests done a month or four times a month. You're going to have to be tested once a week. If you come back positive, you basically have to get off your employment in the context of you not getting paid, right? Because you have chosen to not be vaccinated. I think that we're going to see more health systems, like the Methodist system in Houston, that mandated everybody to be vaccinated. And actually, that was challenged in court, and they lost in court. Not the hospital, but the people who challenged the mandate. And um, it still kind of makes me fatigued to try to understand why people who work in the healthcare environment don't want to get vaccinated. That is, I mean, because I work in that environment, I work in the hospital, I work in the clinic, and I'm very respectful of individual choice, right? But I'm also very respectful of our need to support each other, right? And there's no worse place than a healthcare facility for somebody to get COVID, right? And the whole issue of not being vaccinated has become a family issue. So you get families who don't get vaccinated, the parents don't get vaccinated, the teenagers, 12 and older, don't get vaccinated. So when you get sick, you're taking the illness home if you're a healthcare professional, right?
It's interesting you said that. A friend who chose not to be vaccinated, he did get the COVID-19 and had some symptoms and isolated himself. But a lot of his staff for the business that he runs um, got COVID-19, and one gentleman came very, very close to dying. Been in the hospitals, intubated and like. And I could tell from his posts and chatting with him that he felt a tremendous amount of guilt associated with that. That hey, I may have been the reason this person got it. In addition, I know people that are both in military law, actually military law enforcement and nursing, who again use it as more of a political decision on their side, who have refused to get the vaccine. One gentleman is actually in the National Guard, and he told me, "Oh, they can't make me get it." I said, "Well, wait a minute. When you're in the National Guard or when you're in the military, you are part of a system that says yes. When they give you those orders, you must do it." I said, "Otherwise, maybe you have to exit the military." And there's some interesting decisions that some people are going to have to make concerning that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that um, there's been a political flag that has to do with mandates in general that has been misconstrued. I think in terms of uh, people's understanding, right? Uh, in and they get confused between freedom and danger, right? Um, and that I mean, those kinds of things have been debated. Free speech rights, you know, freedom, and there's all kinds of regulations and limitations and things that we can do, right? Um, and there's a lot of paradox and controversy between things that we're allowed to do and not allowed to do, and then we follow the rules. But you can't walk into a movie theater and yell fire, right?
Mhm.
You're mandated to not do that. You can actually go to jail for doing that, and that can create serious consequences for the people in there. So all rules, all freedoms have boundaries, right? And we had a small percentage of the population who, fortunately, small, but that have um, this idea that freedoms are absolute, right? And freedoms are not absolute because of a societal contract that eventually became laws, right? And that we have to follow and that have consequences. So, something that I'm starting to see is the rumbles among the insurance companies, right? Where basically they're saying, okay, you don't want to get vaccinated? Then if you get COVID, we won't pay for your treatment,
Interesting.
right? I mean, and I've said this in many programs before. In the United States, we always do the right thing. We end up doing it for the wrong reason, right? So when people start being affected in their pockets, Okay, that's probably the stronger motivator. Okay, more than freedom, more than a lot of different things. And I'm not criticizing people who are very strict with their beliefs, right? But that's a smaller number of the population. I think that we have a lot of people following and testing the political waters, trying to decide which current to follow, right? And then we have complications from that.
Yeah, and it's people say it's my right, as we've discussed, but rights come with responsibility. As you mentioned, a social contract says that some of your rights are actually slightly waived, and you agree to that. If you live in Arizona, for example, where we're from, there's something called the implied consent law, and
Hmm.
people don't even know it exists. But when you sign to get your driver's license, there's a little bit of that search and seizure issue that becomes different. They can ask to take your blood or breath anytime for a DUI, including in your own home if they have suspicion of you doing that. People say, well, that's ridiculous. I'll say, no, I know my rights. They'll get a warrant, arrest you, do the whole 9 yards. But even if you test clean, you lose your license for an entire year. And again, because those laws that we decided in individual areas to keep ourselves safe can sometimes trump the quote unquote rights. And you're right, they're not absolute. They're flexible and they're based on that social contract and the laws of the land in where you live. And the ability for any business, because they're not the government oppressing you, to say, hey, we're not going to allow you into our place of work if you're not vaccinated, or maybe even we're not going to cover your insurance because you're not vaccinated, is not an infringement on rights. That's simply the business choosing to do business the way they want to do it.
Exactly. I mean, and you see it in a lot of businesses. Like, I mean, a medical director of a psychiatric hospital, we have a big sign that says "No weapons allowed." Right? That's a decision the business made, regardless of what the laws are. If we don't allow guns, we can have you arrested for bringing a gun. Right? I mean, obviously, there's some reasons why we don't want guns in a psychiatric facility, right? But in general, um, people tend to respect that, right? Um, but they're willing to die for the concept, right? Now, not many people are willing to do that, okay? And I think that we were talking about this before. There's something to be admired about people being passionate about their concepts, right? Most people are not, but there's some people who are very passionate about it. But passion comes with responsibility and consequence,
Mhm.
right? So what is happening with the health system, because I work with doctors all the time, is that they're getting tired, right, of having to deal with the consequences of irresponsibility, right? And they get frustrated, they get tired, you know. Um, and again, we always going to have a percentage of the population that is not going to get vaccinated. The problem is that it's becoming regionalized and is becoming an issue, a political issue.
Mhm.
And the consequences are there. You and I were talking about this because most of the people who are not getting vaccinated are doing it for political reasons, not for health reasons. And in those states where we're having a worse Delta variant pandemic right now, Florida, Alabama, Texas, right? Um, the level of tolerance for the irresponsibility is is getting pretty low,
Mhm.
right? And there's going to be a huge uh, response to that from the people who are vaccinated because they're basically saying we were on our way to be free from this, right? And now we're back on it because of you.
But there's that. It was recently. I think it might have been Alabama, where a bunch of doctors stood up and said, "Look, if you come to us with COVID and you have not been vaccinated, we may not treat you." And I had two nurses, COVID nurses, in one of my classes recently, and they're talking about that empathy fatigue, where people are coming in, they're treating them, and when they say, "Have you been vaccinated?" they say, "No, I haven't." Their tone changes a little. They're trying not to, but it does happen, where they say, "Well, I guess you're here for a reason then, right?"
Yeah, you know, in my business in psychiatry, we tend to be neutral and empathic, right? Um, and we're probably the best in the medical profession to do that. Uh, but you cannot have that expectation from all areas of medicine. It's an expectation that people will be neutral, not judgmental, right? But you get tired of it, right? You get tired of hitting people in the head with messaging and telling them. I mean, at a certain point, you have to say, "What are you doing?" Right? What is the purpose? What is your motivation to do this? Okay. I mean, in some people, it's actually delusional. Fortunately, there's little numbers in terms of delusional thinking about, somebody's putting a microchip in my arm and he's going to be following me for the rest of the United States for my life. Nobody needs to do that. They're doing it already with your
Yeah.
hand, with your phone,
Steve
right?
Jobs took care of that a long time ago,
Yeah, I mean,
and you'll never give it up.
yeah. So you don't give up your phone, but you're concerned about a vaccination, right? Okay, so that's fine. But the reality is that there's consequence to that, and what they don't understand is that we all pay the consequence, right? We went to this dilemma many years ago with bike rides with motorcycles in Arizona, right?
That's
In
right.
terms of wearing a helmet or not wearing a helmet. In Arizona, you don't have to wear a helmet, and we still debate the issue because every time somebody in the motorcycle who's not insured gets into an accident, and breaks their neck and they have a head injury, that costs it can cost millions of dollars in treatment, let alone the disability and the suffering that accompanies that and nursing home treatments and all of that different stuff. And guess who pays for that?
We do.
Exactly. So there's got to be a balance of uh, rights, and also have to be a balance of responsibility, right? So I think that we need to be more cognizant of that.
Yeah, as you say, it is a risk assessment whether you want to take it or not. Understand that there's costs associated with it. There's some maybe lack of empathy if you do get sick. Again, I know someone who got sick recently refused to take the vaccine, and at one point literally looked at me. Don't you feel bad for me? I said, I feel bad, but you had some options. Um, I think that the lack of empathy can be a little difficult, but what people argument I hear all the time is that no vaccine is without side effects, and the side effects they don't understand yet. But essentially, what this FDA approval is saying, we have enough data to say, yes, we do know what the potential side effects are. Here's the data. Here's who's at risk of the vaccine, and the percentages of what you're at risk of having the vaccine versus not having it and getting COVID. Correct?
Yes. Well, you see, here's what happens, and I'm getting a couple of questions
Please
and
do that.
statements, and I find it fascinating because I think that we need to be respectful of other people's opinions. But the reality is that vaccines were not made to prevent illnesses 100%.
Hmm.
The vaccines in general ought to prevent the consequences of a serious illness, right? So, yes, we have had bad history with some vaccines, but the vaccine history in general has been pretty positive in terms of enlarging our lifespan, right? So we live longer, not necessarily because we have better medications, but we have good vaccines and we have good hygiene. That has actually made a world of a difference. And I think that in general, most of the people who get tested with these vaccines initially are healthcare professionals. We get tested with these vaccines. Um, I mean, the other thing that I think is a fact that most side effects of a vaccine will occur in the first 90 days after they get released. Okay, the big majority of the side effects. We don't see a lot of side effects past 90 days. And we are probably almost a year into the use of this vaccine. And in general, I think the number of preventive measures and the prevention of death and serious illness has been so significant that I don't think we've seen anything like this in terms of the vaccine efficacy, right? Are the vaccines perfect? Absolutely not, right? Uh, then we're going to have the issue of vaccinating children, which is going to create a whole new set of fears and controversies. Um, it's being studied as we speak, right? And I actually know healthcare professionals that have had their children vaccinated as part of those protocols. So the reality is that when we put in the management of risk perspective, okay, um, there's a lot more risk of death and there's a lot more risk of serious illness and consequences long term from getting COVID than from getting the vaccine.
Yeah, it seems like they want people that want this overwhelming and complete um, confidence that if they take it, they'll be 100% safe, absolutely no side effects, and they'll never get COVID. And that's just not how these things work. It's about risk mitigation and deciding, okay, what am I going to risk to one side for the other? If I do get the illness, it's going to definitely decrease the mortality rate. And again, the safety factors and everything else have been put into place. This is relatively old technology, right? This is not a brand new thing. The virus may be novel, but the technology we're using to combat it is not necessarily a brand new, totally untested device. Is that correct?
Well, mRNA has been around since the 1990s and has been subtly studied since the mid 2000s. And it has actually other vaccines have been developed that were not required. Um, So I think that what the whole mRNA technology is something that we're going to see more and more of, not only in terms of vaccines, but in treatment of chronic illnesses and targeting cancer and all kinds of different things. That is really revolutionary. That I think is going to further increase uh, longevity. You know, one of the statistics that we haven't paid much attention to is that for the first time in many years, lifespan has decreased in the United States as a result of the pandemic.
It has.
Okay, and that's major. You know, people were not. Our generation is not going to live as long as a result of this disorder, and that's not only the disorder; is how badly it was managed in the United States, where we have 3% of the world population and 25% of the deaths. So that by itself is a statistic that is pretty bad. So we don't need to get everybody vaccinated, but we need to get about 75 to 80%. So that means that uh, there's still room for approximately uh, 60 million people not getting vaccinated,
Mm.
right? So even if we can get to that and we can distribute it along the United States in a good measure, I mean Alabama has a vaccination rate on the below 40%, right? I mean, Arizona, we had like 54, 53%, right? But you go to states like Vermont, where they're in the 70%, I think, and then you get into states where they don't have much of an issue with the Delta variant, right? And then we have a little spike with it. So, I mean, it's becoming quite evident that political misconceptions and misinformation about vaccines that has been widely distributed can really uh, increased mortality. I mean, you go to Missouri right now, and all of the ICU beds are full. You go to Florida, ICUs are full. You go to Alabama, ICUs are full. You go to Texas, ICUs are full. So there's something to be said about personal and community responsibility. I think we need to take seriously.
And for those who are still, concerned about this, as Dr. Pino just said, there's a certain percentage of you that really do not have to take it. It's true. We'll get past it as long as the folks who are on the edge, who've maybe been waiting for this news to come out and some information, take that next step. But we can get to 70% or so in every state. Will help significantly reduce costs, reduce deaths, reduce illness, and really help get this under control. So for those on the edge, this is important news for you. Please take your time to look at it, discuss it, as you've said before, with your doctor, and see if it's the right thing for you. For some of you, it's never going to change your mind, and that's okay. Be smart about what you're doing and how you interact with people, of course.
Well, there's another side to this, and it has to do with the mask mandates, right? And I'm always hearing the arguments on trying, and I hear people making the argument like if they're talking to themselves, right? Um, in terms of, I need to continue convincing myself that I don't want this. And I want to challenge people that can you look at the arguments on why you should get it, not why you shouldn't get it, right? And if you choose to not get the vaccine, just be responsible. No, wear your mask,
Mm.
right? Because then you get into the whole political issue of wearing a mask, and the manly issue of using a mask. You have to be macho and you have to confront the virus and grab it by the horns, you know, until it gets you to the ICU, and then you're complaining that you're feeling bad because you didn't get vaccinated, and I mean, there's tons of examples of that, right? So I'm always fascinated by people doing things that go against their survival instinct, right? A survival instinct tells us to utilize our anxiety in ways to find solutions to the fear, not to find excuses to it, right? And I think it's terribly important that we stay focused on that, because in I mean, basically, as humans and as members of the uh, animal society and mammals and
Species.
all of
Yeah.
that species, uh, we have a survival instinct. So when I see people challenging their survival instinct and finding logical and sometimes delusional explanations why they shouldn't pay attention to the gut feeling that they're unsafe, right? There's a problem. Okay. So I have no doubt that we're gonna survive this, right? But I'm always concerned and challenged by political slogans, and I'm concerned about why people will want to have people of their political affiliation dead. And you and I have had this discussion before. If you are in a red state like Alabama and a reddish state like Florida or Mississippi, why do you want your followers dead?
Mm. You want to
What?
keep those constituents alive.
Yeah,
Kind of the most important thing.
yeah, they're the ones who vote for you, and you basically, I mean, it's like uh, the fiddler. He's just playing all the rats out into the abyss. I mean, it's just like ridiculous. I mean, it makes no sense. It's almost delusional, I would say.
Well, I think it's important for people to look at it, as you said, from a personal standpoint, from a health standpoint, from a social contract standpoint, regardless of political belief, religious belief, or whatever. Just look at it for what it is. If you choose not to get the vaccine, that is your choice. Again, this is America. You get to do that. However, be responsible in how you interact and behave with others who have chosen to get it and who don't want to be exposed. If you do get sick, understand there might be a lack of empathy towards your situation. Of course, you'll be treated. Every hospital will do that, and any doctor will. But at least be aware of what you're doing and how you're doing it, and try to make your decision based, as you said, on a survival instinct, rational decisions, and not belief systems or anything else.
Yeah, and to understand that even those people who are providing quote unquote guidance and misinformation about the vaccine and masks and all of that, they're all vaccinated and they
They
all wear
are.
masks,
They
which
are.
is, I think, is that's pretty cynical,
Mm.
right? I mean, and I think cynicism should not be the guide to provide people, in terms of what's best for them.
So it is good news, though, folks. For those of you who've been hesitant, please look at the information out there. This FDA approval is significant, and hopefully it'll leave some of your fears and your worries. Still, take your time, talk to your doctor, make the right decision. And if you choose not to, also make the right decision on your behaviors in order to keep yourself safe and others. Anything else to add before we go tonight, Dr. Patino?
No, just thank you very much, and thank you for your comments. They're well taken. And we're gonna be seeing you again next week. We're gonna find another interesting topic for next week. But thank you very much for listening to us, and we'll certainly be on top of this issue. And I hope all of you stay safe and well. Thank you.
Take care. Of course, everybody like, subscribe, share, and we'll see you again next week. Take care.
Thank you, Vince.